thank you again so much for being here for this conversation. Dan is very clear about City Club being the place to hold the conversation. And we hold them, good, bad, or ugly. We have them. And it is our responsibility, and we feel that we've been the custodians here at City Club to carry this into the next whatever. We understand that property taxes is a really, really hot issue. Fritz explained it to me a little over a year ago, and I left. I was like, I got it. Now I can go and I can tell people what it is. And about 15 minutes later, I was like, I don't know what he said. And I say that because it's very clear that this is not an easy discussion to have. So I believe that things happen for a reason, and serendipitously, it just so happens that Fritz Kaegi happens to be childhood friends from the age of 4, from what I understand, with a guy that, you know, I'm pretty close to and get to work with pretty closely. So from what I understand, and you guys can correct this if I'm not telling the truth, Fritz Kaegi and Jason Tyler, who happens to be the CFO of Northern Trust, a little bank down the street that they let me hang out at, have been friends since they were 4 years old. And who better to have a discussion about something that is incredibly challenging than the person you've probably been friends with for so long. So I am looking forward to this discussion. I think we've got lots of people in the room. If you have not, Dan asked you to get questions up. If you have not gotten your questions, I suggest that you try to get them in because we want to make sure that we have time for them. You have pieces of paper on the table that you can, Amanda will come and get them. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Fritz Kaegi and Jason Tyler.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks everybody for coming to do this. It's weird because Fritz and I have breakfast or lunch a bunch, and we talk about this stuff. And so now it's like we're having breakfast or lunch in front of 180 people. Which is totally fine.
There we go.
Same topics, and first of all, I do want to start at where Jackie alluded to, because the theme of High Park to Oak Park is important, and just the world is different now, and in a lot of ways, as much as we say things are not as good as they used to be, but in some ways, you go back to the mid-'70s when you and I were in and around High Park or on the South Side and Kenwood, it wasn't super common for people in the world like you and I to be such close friends, and it isn't lost on me. It was at the time, but I reflect now back, just think about the mid-'70s, and then I was a black kid from the South Side of Chicago, single mother, and I was at your house all the time. Those are literally the earliest memories I have. And just how incredibly welcomed I felt in your house. I just think it says a lot about the city and about your family. And so, it's not something we talk about publicly. I was trying to do it. I was trying to give a compliment.
So we had to do this picture. So this is at my 5th birthday party. And we all have great 70s hair in the picture here. I've got my mother-provided bowl cut, which I wore until I was in 7th grade, and I still have issues with that with my mom. And then you can see Jason there, right to my left.
I have to email my mother and ask why she permed my hair. Unbelievable. Like, that was actually okay at some point in history.
We were kids growing up at a time when America had really made a big change. And so all the changes in the 60s helped make possible the world that we grew up in. And we were really fortunate for that, because those values learned, friendships we made, have stayed with us our whole life in terms of what we do with our time. And where we live and the choices that we make, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah, no, obviously, I think you and I both were impacted a lot by us growing up. I think we learned a lot, the importance of not perming your hair if you're male.
Go to a barber.
Go to a barber. Do not let your mother perm your hair. And it's fine to change the slide whenever you guys want. but there are a lot of things that that I think is prevalent in and around Hyde Park, but also I don't think it's coincidental. We both ended up still staying around Chicago, but moving to another area with a lot of diversity, Oak Park River Forest, where we both have lived for a long time and basically raised our children in a place that has similar values and a place that Jackie knows really well also. So
just don't invite me to
yeah. So what do you think it is about the areas we grew up in? What is it that made you stick around Chicago? You had a great academic youth. Obviously, you go to a great school in Haverford and could have done anything, anywhere. But you came back, you chose to come back to this city, this area, this county. What led you to do that?
Well, first of all, I've always loved Chicago. I love what it stands for as a city. In terms of how it grew through commerce and cooperation with really part of the American story. I love the beauty of the city. I love all our neighborhoods. And what we grew up in Hyde Park was really at the leading edge of making us an integrated, racially tolerant city that has helped to change the country and getting us a president elected. And I think that spirit is really helping to change America. But it's one of the things I love about Chicago. I had the experience of living abroad in the 90s. I was living in Russia. And I saw all the optimism and possibilities of when that country had a chance to go to, have a free economy and capitalism and privatization, and I saw all that get squandered. And I can't tell you what a terrible feeling it is to watch that as an observer, but have no voice in that. And they literally do not want to hear your voice.
They do not
as all that is happening. They probably think you're responsible. But that experience is what led me think, as I was thinking about what do I want my life to be about, is I want to be involved in a community where I've grown up in and that I care about. And whatever I do, I was doing international investing. I want to be here, connected with all the things I care about. And so that's what led me back.
So, all right, so then you fast forward and you end up at one of the quintessential investment management firms in the world, at Wanger Asset Management, and you ascend to be co-portfolio manager of the flagship product, the Acorn Fund, which people in investment management, that was the standard of running a very large public equity world-class mutual fund. What led to a career? Why did you choose finance?
Well, I like investing because it's a way to take your knowledge about the world, and if you think you can have a sense of how the future might be different, where the world might be going, if you can think longer term than the market, that is a pretty great job because you can incorporate all the things that you think you might know about the world and then get to know companies and the people who run them. And I really like that, combined with the stewardship. In finance, a lot of people think it's just about trading, but it's also about stewardship. You're putting other people's needs and you're a fiduciary. And I really like the stewardship that came from that. And it's also a big part of the job that we have here today. I like using the valuation things that we use in our profession for public good as a steward. I really like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's why I wanted to talk about this. A lot of the type of investing you did, which was, Wanger was about long-term investing and thinking about value relative to price. And so it was not just, I think the markets are going to go up. It wasn't, having the 10-box talking heads on CNN, very analytical, very long-term, not turning over the stock portfolio a lot. And so are those values things that you picked up there, or do you think it was already in you, and are you taking those to the work that you're doing now?
Well, I mean, first of all, the world is so endlessly fascinating, right? In a free market economy, we are endlessly creating new cool things, and people are testing out new ideas in the marketplace. And it's really fun when you're an investment manager to say, I want to go and see the best paint company in the world in India and think, hey, India might need a whole coat of paint as it grows. And that's a pretty good business. I want to go see them. And, it might take a while to build up a stake, but if we own that for 10 years, that could be the place to go. So that is endlessly fascinating, just in the way that, the job I have here, you have 5.3 million people in Cook County, and all the different communities are so different. All the range of people in God's kingdom and all the different things that we have, from logistics going on in the South to data centers going on in the city, to the incredible logistics transformation that's taking place around O'Hare. All those, and life science growing. It's just if you like the world, you see it play out as an investor, and you see it play out in the world that we do here at our office, because we have to have our finger on the pulse of all these trends. What I like is that my job was about the job of estimating the value of companies, of real estate, of different kinds of assets. And that is what is required in this job here, and it's really nice to do that for the public good, to make it go in a more equitable direction in the process, given all the problems that our system, our office had for many years.
Yeah, that's what I think is a corollary is, in the type of investing you did, it's about looking at a company, and the market has set a price for it. The market says this company is worth $14 billion. There have to be instances where you say, okay, I think that's appropriate, I think that's appropriate, I think that's appropriate, but you're looking for a situation where you say, actually, this company is not worth $14 billion, the market says it's actually worth $18 billion. And so just be that patience, but then looking for those disconnects. So is that what, and we'll talk about it, but do you think about that same type of concept as you're thinking about property value?
Actually, I can't do that. So the job is not for me to think what I think it might be worth intrinsically as an investor. If it was managed well, that's not the job of the assessor. The job of the assessor is, where is the market valuing this thing right now? And so basically, the job of the assessor involves the first part of, okay, as an investor, you're going to look at that, but the investor, you're bringing your own opinion to it, and you're thinking about how the world might change, and you're trying to anticipate that. So that was so that's a little bit different. Yeah. But what is important is, I strongly believe in the ethical principles that underlie, the Chartered Financial Analyst program, all the things duties that you have as an analyst to be, to be well informed and use data properly, not to use the valuation process to achieve some other means, but instead to use it as a steward. Yeah. So I think that's important. That's an important thing that is different from the attitude that a lot of people have had in my role before. In my role before, you typically see professional politicians or lawyers who maybe don't have the same fidelity to valuation. Right. But I come into it as a finance person who believes in the ethics that underlie the valuation process. But
it's interesting, even the first answer to the question, that you're not bringing your opinions about value to your job is actually, I think that's instructive for people to view. This isn't Fritz saying, actually, no, these properties are, I think they're worth more. It's what is the market telling us about it?
That's right. That's exactly right.
So, all right, now I want to talk about, it's interesting, and I know you and I have talked about this a lot. There's so many smart people who care so much about the city and about our region, whether the county, the state, and they've done well in their career, and they know that at a point they can do something else to make a difference. But they look at the world of politics and they say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to make my family susceptible to that type of scrutiny. I'm not going to make myself susceptible to it. And they do things on the periphery, and maybe I put myself in this bucket where you can help philanthropically in other ways, but you don't completely dive in and say, I'm going to become a public servant. How did you go through that thought process, and what led you to say, I'm going to do it?
Well, it was an evolution. We were both fortunate to be part of the Leadership Greater Chicago program that exposed us to thinking. It's kind of like, I've heard someone say, it's like a graduate course on Chicago. Yeah. Which it kind of is, where you're exposed to different issues going on in the city, and that really scratched an itch that was missing from my job. What I loved in my job was investing. I like the competitiveness. It's well remunerated. You're working with interesting people, talking to interesting people, but you're not solving problems that you see around you. Just in that same terrible feeling that I had when I was living in Russia in the 90s when bad things are happening and here I am trying to value the steel company, that is kind of an empty feeling. When you see bad things going on around you and you think you might be able to do something about it, but then the person who's doing bad things didn't get a challenge in 2014 even though people knew there were bad things happening, that sort of got me to thinking, well, someone has to step up to make this system better. And I've been exposed to the issues of how assessments could hurt people from Kenwood Academy, where do we have any Broncos in the room in here today? Okay, so Kenwood is the high school that serves Hyde Park, the Hyde Park neighborhood. And I'm a devoted alum, would go to our picnic every year. And a lot of people in my generation bought homes in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the housing market was very strong. But then they got slammed in the housing crisis of 2007, 2008. And I would see people and people would say, hey, Fritz, you're a finance guy. I'm underwater on my mortgage and the value of my home is going down. My taxes are going up. Like, do you understand this? I'm like, I don't. Yeah. I don't understand that. And then I started learning more, including through the Leadership Greater Chicago program, about how the system works. We have a zero-sum property tax system where there's a certain amount that that all the different taxing bodies in the city have to raise, but your assessment as the share of total assessed value is your share of that amount that has to be paid. So if some properties are undervalued while yours are overvalued, you are going to be hurt in that world. And if politics and other kinds of conflicts are injected into that kind of system, it can lead to really huge disparities. And so that's what I came to gradually learn about. And I as a student of Chicago history, I thought, Chicagoans have looked the other way at this before, but I think they don't want to do that anymore. Yeah. They see a Chicago where that has hurt our economy, that's hurt average people who don't have a lot of power. And if we make the system more transparent, it would be more equitable, and it would probably be better for investors too. Yeah. If it's more transparent, we as investment people, we know that if you can de-risk the investment environment, especially for people who are outside of Chicago, then we can help to facilitate investment here. What people didn't like is the world of investing in real estate is more and more dominated by pension funds from Singapore and insurance companies from Germany. The last thing they want to hear is that you need to hire an alderman to figure out how this works. Right. Like they'll say, nope, don't want to do the brain damage of that. We're going to invest somewhere else. Right. So I thought, we need to get to a system where valuations are transparent, data sources are transparent. That would help to facilitate investment here. Did you find,
you've traveled a lot, and I know you spent time in Russia, but I remember talking to you when you were co-managing Acorn funds. You were traveling all over the place.
Yeah, we went to 40 countries.
All over the place, all the time, which I think is phenomenal because you just get a chance. It's one of the great things about my job is I get to go to different not just places, but cultures. And I always come back learning something, even from the cultures that we scrutinize the most. I always learn something. Are there other areas in the U.S. that have figured out property tax assessment in ways that make you think there's something for us to incorporate?
Yes. So when Sam Zell passed away recently, but I talked to him and I said, Sam, you invest around America, around the world. Can I talk to your team to see which geographies are the most transparent, and not necessarily the lowest tax, but which ones are the most transparent? What are the systems that from your perspective make it easier to invest? And talked with his team, and he said, Boston, Virginia, Washington. These are areas where they have good data collection, they have more transparent assessment systems, and it facilitates a lot of investment. If you've been to the Boston area recently, their office market, yes, it's suffering, but there is an absolute explosion in the life sciences industry taking place. That's one of the avenues of the future for Chicago area potential. In Virginia, you have the data center capital of the world, and you have other thriving parts of the economy there. So those are some things that we can bring here. The other thing I want to mention is that when you spend a lot of time abroad or investing around the world, it makes you appreciate more what we have here. Yeah. The thing that's special about Chicago is a tradition of public-private cooperation on big civic problems, which I think the City Club exemplifies that spirit. What Northern Trust does in your civic participation exemplifies that spirit. I know we have other people who, we have elected leaders here like Representative Tarver, Representative Katz-Mule. I think we have others, but then we also have people who are in the business community who are so active, like Al Friedman and others, John Simpson, so many others. This is something that's special to Chicago.
Yeah.
A lot of other cities in America are not like that, right. And it's an asset that we have that we need to nurture.
Yeah. So you come into public service. What are the biggest surprises? Or even if you anticipate or talk to people and say, boy, I did not expect that to happen.
Well, I never expected in the world of politics there to be a lot of Vestal virgins out there. I'll put it that way. The thing that has been encouraging is there are so many other people who are civic-minded who bring together really interesting experiences outside of government to the job. Like I think in Springfield, and Representative Katz-Mule and Tarver may talk about this, is a lot of people have not come to Springfield through traditional routes in politics or working in a legislator's office. They came here as entrepreneurs, they came here as teachers, they came here as lawyers, and we've had a lot of changeover in the last 10, 15 years, so there's a whole new kind of spirit and attitude in people who are in Springfield. We also see this in city council and county government. In county government, we have people who have done amazing things in healthcare and technology and data science and the law, and it's amazing to have them as resources. So that has been one of the positive things about it. Sometimes it surprises me when people are thinking more about, what are you going to do for me rather than what are you going to do for my constituents? Right. Like that's always a negative, but you can't let it bring you down.
Yeah. All right. Now I want to get into the details on the state of real estate in our area. It's important to everybody here for various reasons. You talked a few minutes ago about the importance of transparency. That you want to unpack that for people. What are the dimensions that you think didn't exist before in transparency and that you've been trying to unveil for the community?
Sure. I think people ought to know, where the numbers that you've set out there in assessments are coming from. First of all, you should show your math. And also, you should show enough math so that someone who's considering an investment can think ahead and think about, okay, I know how the assessor's office thinks about valuation for this kind of asset. I can have a reasonable expectation of how they might value it. And that will help me in making an underwriting decision. That will help me in going out to investors. If I'm leasing out my space to others who are taking on that risk, that helps them. We can come to agreements. If you're a landlord and tenant, you can come to agreements on the risk sharing for anything that comes with assessments when we're putting that out there. So what do we do? The last 3 years now, we have published how we value every single commercial parcel. You can go, and I know we have landlords here, you can go and see for an apartment building, what rent did we assume? What vacancy did we assume? What capitalization rate did we assume for it to figure out how we valued it? And then we have a person who heads commercial outreach who can, if you have issues about, hey, you are mischaracterizing my asset. It's not like this, it's like that. We have a person that works with industry associations and chambers. He's a fellow graduate of mine from Stanford Business School. He's run a neighborhood chamber, worked for top corporates. That really helps people on that transparency side. Then we do have an investor day where the whole global investment community can come here. We record it and make it available for sources like Bloomberg. And we're really thinking about what if there's a guy in New York who's considering providing capital for an investment here. We want to have enough information for them so that they don't have to be guided by headlines that they might read in a paper, but can be guided by data.
Okay. Now, obviously, the biggest jurisdiction within the county is Chicago, and you're halfway through the Chicago reassessment. how's that going? What should people be thinking about as you're completing that work?
Well, we are halfway through. We haven't released assessments for downtown Chicago yet. Also, one northwest side area, Jefferson Township. But we have for the rest of the city, and we have for West Township, which includes some of downtown. We're seeing the most important trend is the last 3 years have been the best market in residential real estate for the last 2 decades. And it's affecting every neighborhood in Chicago. Neighborhoods on the south side or west side where you might have found a home for $100,000 or $125,000 before, in the years after the financial crisis, it's hard to buy them under $200,000 now. And that has led to a lot of wealth creation. We think all the work that we've done on making residential assessments transparent, fair, and equitable has really helped as part of all the larger trends that are guiding that. And that trend alone, because residential, single-family residential is the biggest part of Chicago's tax base, that's going to lead our base to grow this year.
Yep.
We think it'll result in lower rates for all property owners in Chicago. On the commercial side of the equation, we see and by the way, like pretty much every residential neighborhood in Chicago is doing well except for the Gold Coast. And if you own condos in the Gold Coast, like that's been a weaker market. If I were taking off my assessor hat and putting on my investor hat, I would be looking. Like it's priced. It's a pretty good time to be a buyer.
Why do you think? What do you think drove the underperformance of that? I
think there's a lot of there's sort of headline negativity amongst the people that we might hang out at.
Yeah.
And it's kind of negativity is sometimes contagious.
Yeah.
So a lot of us have probably had the experience of going to a bar or a party or maybe a club and you're talking to someone and like the first natural lubricant for conversation is a complaint about X,
it just
Y,
becomes stigmatized after a while. And
yes.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, people are recognizing that we're among the big cities in America, we're one of the most affordable places to be. If you compare it to our peers in Boston, D.C., Seattle, San Francisco, L.A., our market is very strong. The other thing I want to mention on the commercial side is we see strength in logistics, industrial. This is one of the hottest parts of the market. Chicago is at the center of our continent. And as everyone is reshoring in all the different industry supply chains, they realize that outsourcing to China and all these international places had exposed them to a lot of risk. People are looking for a second choice in their supply chain that is closer to home, is closer to the consumer. It can be supplied more just in time, and that is really good for Chicago. That's driving industrial. And then we have data centers doing very well. We're one of the data center capitals of the world. We have lots of power generation, America's biggest fleet of nuclear reactors, where we export power, and data centers suck up power like you would not believe.
Yep.
So we have the growth in the quantum, this new quantum computer project that's coming into the Old South work site. That has the potential to create technologies that can drive data centers without sucking up so much power. So that's a new industry that's being created in Chicago. We have life sciences, people realizing, hey, I don't need to be in Kendall Square in Boston. I want to be here by innovators in Chicago. I think that's good. We have our office market, which is weak. Structural factors, we can talk about that, but that is also a mixed bag.
Okay. All right, I want to talk about, I separate the industry more into what's residential, what's commercial. So let's split it for a little bit. And so if we start with on the residential side, a lot of the younger generation look to, when am I going to buy my first piece of property? And they think about the property taxes. It's a big element of their overall home ownership. So what have you done to help or to address the ability for newer buyers to enter the market? This is one of the hottest topics in America right now. Yeah.
How are younger people going to be able to become homeowners? Because there is an attitude amongst some people in the younger generation where, and this especially happens in the West Coast and some of these more expensive markets, I'm never going to own. Yeah. I'm never going to be able to own. And that we can't have that kind of attitude. It doesn't need to happen that way. And because Chicago is so affordable, there are lots of opportunities, and I think this is powering, combined with Chicago becoming a more racially tolerant city. I think we are seeing people looking more around communities they might not have looked at before, and it's helping real estate markets. We got passed an affordable housing bill that we're working with our partners in the legislature who are here, that incentivizes the construction of affordable housing, that if you commit to having a certain percentage of the units in your building, which is 7 units or more, then you get a significant reduction in your assessment. It can be as big as 35%, and that is very net present value positive for those financial people out there, and it's helping to drive growth and construction of apartments. But we're not having enough growth in construction of single-family homes.
Yep.
The typical home in Chicago sells for about $275,000. It costs about $400,000 to build one right now.
Right.
And so we need to figure out a way to get and this is an American problem. Vice President Harris has talked about this is an issue, and there's a lot of discussion out there in the world of policy thinking about what more can we do to get the construction of housing, because the typical rule is, you know, your home can't be much more than 3 times your income. You know, if you can only build a unit for $400,000, that is pricing most Chicagoans, especially younger Chicagoans, out of becoming homeowners. So this is something we really need to work on.
Yeah, especially with higher interest rates, it makes it even harder.
100%.
Okay, so now let's go to the other end of the spectrum. We all hear stories about, you know, communities getting angry residents together that have been homeowners for a long time, talking about the increase that they're experiencing in their assessments and property taxes in general. Mm-hmm. What are you doing to try to help that area of our community? Yeah,
there are a couple of trends and factors that have come together to make the last couple of years really hard. So I mentioned the last 3-4 years of residential, in single-family residential homes, the market's been very strong, especially in the wake of COVID, especially because there's not enough new construction happening. Mm-hmm. And homes were selling for way below replacement value, and now they're coming up. That combined with, you know, when we sent out assessments in the north suburbs, the numbers that we estimated, you know, home values were up a lot in the 30% plus range. But commercial values, especially led by apartments and industrial, some other commercial classes, were also up a lot, and they'd been undervalued. So when we reassessed the north suburbs, homeowners had a slightly lower share of the burden. And then in the south suburbs, last year when we reassessed it, same thing, homes up a lot, 30–40%, but also commercial up. And again, homeowners had a slightly lower share of the burden when we were done with assessing it. But there were massive cuts done by another body of government, the Cook County Board of Review, which were disproportionately on commercial assets. So cutting assessments between 15 to 20% on commercial, but only 1 or 2% on residential. Yeah. And that would skew the base. And so that led to people's taxes homeowners' taxes going up a lot more than they ordinarily would. So that created a lot of friction and misunderstanding. What we're doing is, first of all, trying to make sure that everyone's using good data. We're working off the same data as we do this, and hopefully we can get smaller cuts happening on the commercial side on appeal. But also we think that the legislature could be doing more, our General Assembly, in helping to provide relief for people whose incomes are lower, who are suffering the highest income increases. We think a circuit breaker, which is a mechanism that's used in about half of the states. We have a circuit breaker in this state. What is that? So a circuit breaker is a funded source of relief that could come from either the state or the county or other sources or combined, that focus relief on people whose taxes went up the most, whose incomes are lower. Mm. So it's means tested. And we have a mechanism we used. We had a circuit breaker in this state that was focused on seniors a little bit over 10 years ago. And we think something like this should be looked at here. It's important for communities, especially in the south suburbs, where tax rates are so high. They don't have much of a commercial base. And we don't want to use the exemption process to drive that because it can shift burdens in unexpected ways. Instead, let's focus on supporting these communities and groups with a circuit breaker relief. Yeah. So we're talking with leaders, talking with community members, drafting this legislation right now.
Okay, last minute, and then I'm going to go to the audience, see what questions there are. Another concept that we're hearing about in different areas across the country is the doom loop, where effectively you get property taxes increasing and then people use that as a mechanism to exit, as a catalyst to exit, and then your property base declines and you get into a bad cycle on it. So is that something you worry about for our community?
I worry about other people worrying about the doom loop. Because I'd like to talk about, this is something we've seen it in, Jack, you've probably seen this in the Wall Street Journal and the headlines. We see it in Bloomberg. We see it sort of become a thing in the national press, that the doom loop theory is that, and this is actually similar to what our parents might have heard about in the 70s, was if we have a huge decrease in value of properties in the city, like office buildings, then therefore that will lead to higher taxes that will have to be raised on everyone else, and that will lead to declining services, and that will lead to a doom loop as it feeds on itself. The reason why that's not going to play out in Chicago, first of all, is downtown office is less than what people think of our property tax base. Overall, downtown office, including Fulton Market and near North, is a smidge under 20% of our tax base in Chicago. A lot of people, when I've done a quiz, they think it's 50%, 40%, it's 20%. And then within that 20%, we have the bifurcated group. And when I talk to my peers, I was just at Burning Man for assessors a week ago, where all the assessors around the world get together. I was meeting with my counterparts in Philadelphia and New York and Boston and other areas. The same thing's happening. Higher end office buildings are doing okay because there's a flight to quality. Their rents are holding up better, valuations are holding up better, occupancy is holding up better in the trophy buildings and the A building. Right. The B and C buildings, the lower end buildings, the lower tier buildings, are the ones that are really feeling this structural change in the demand for office space because of work from home and other factors. But B and C is less than 5% of Chicago's tax base. So to start off with, there's less at risk than you'd think. Also, the way taxes work in Chicago and Cook County is that revenues aren't going to go down for them if this happens. The way taxes work here is that the levy that the city and other taxing bodies will receive is fixed, and it grows a little bit every year, regardless of what happens with assessment. So the city's not going to necessarily have a revenue issue if office buildings go down in value. They're going to get their money. They don't need to raise taxes. Now, but the issue is, does that get shifted onto others in a zero-sum system? The thing that's going to be the real shock absorber for Chicagoans is that a lot of our office space is within TIFs. So TIFs, for those of you who don't know, are tax increment financing districts. And when you create a TIF, you lock in place the value that was there at the time. Any incremental value accrues not to the tax base of the city of Chicago or the other taxing bodies, but instead goes to the TIF itself. And that means that if TIFs were created years ago as value grew, all that value is not part of Chicago's tax base. It's part of the base of the TIFs. As value comes down, the TIFs will take the first hit and absorb the hit of any downshift in value before the Chicagoans in their tax base feel that hit.
It's an unrealized gain that goes up.
There we go. So be careful if you're borrowing against anticipating revenues in TIFs.
Right.
That's what I tell our friends at the city of Chicago as they think about this. But it's not that it's not a problem, right? Downtown Chicago is very important to the larger economic ecosystem that we live in. And this sort of, I'm confident that, first of all, those B and C buildings, a lot of them happen to be in pre-war, beautiful buildings that can be converted to residential.
Yep.
We were talking about our kids. You know, I had 4 kids living in my house, including a foreign exchange student, 4 teenagers living in my house. None of them have any interest in driving or getting a driver's license. And if you look at the age 25 to 29 cohort, 30 years ago, 97% of them would have had driver's licenses. Now, in 2020, it was only 83%. And since then, dollars to donuts, it's gone down even more because of, I don't know, people are using Uber or apps, or they've been driven around by us parents or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But people who have those attitudes want to be in a place like Chicago, and especially downtown.
Right. So.
Because it's walkable. You don't have to own a car. And if we can make sure that there are amenities and all the other things that we need to make people feel good about living downtown are there, it's going to succeed. And that goes back to this public-private spirit that we've always had in Chicago. You know, when there have been problems, you know, in the 70s there was a worry, hey, people from the suburbs aren't coming to the city. We need to create some festivals like Chicago Fest or Taste of Chicago. And that was a public-private thing that people worked on to get together. You know, when Mayor Daley, when Mayor Washington was here, they created TIFs that helped to stimulate a lot of growth in office buildings. When we had Mayor Richard M. Daley, we had, you know, what can we do to make downtown more of a place that people want to live? And
Millennium Park.
Millennium Park. They moved the Goodman from, you know, the middle of Grant Park onto Dearborn Street, and these were all public-private issues. And I think we are going to overcome whatever structural weakness this is by converting some of these office buildings to apartments. We're doing things like getting a Google, which, you know, at Google, Chicago is the #2 desired destination for their employees because it's affordable. I went to business school at Stanford. It's impossible to buy a home, even if you're a Google employee in some of these communities in Silicon Valley. So people are coming from universities. They want to live here because the standard of living. And you don't need to drive to do that. But we need to attend to some of the issues with the CTA, with crime. We want to have enough vitality downtown so that there's enough of an ecosystem so people can open a business and stay open late and thrive. So, you know, I'm confident all the energy that we have in our entrepreneurial community will overcome that.
Me too. Okay, we got 7 minutes to hear from the audience. Amanda, you want me to start with what you gave me, or do you go? Okay, first question actually came from David Orr. So what steps could the Board of Review take to improve the overall process of assessing property in Cook County?
I think one of the things that should be done is to look at the appraisals that they're using as evidence. We require appraisals to meet a congressional standard, the national banking industry standard that's called USPAP. They don't require that, and I think there are a lot of appraisals being written that would not be suited for lining the cage of a pet. And you know, that's their business model. We've complained to the state regulator about this, and we did a study of our own. We looked at appraisals that were submitted to us from 2020 to 2024 on properties that sold, and we looked at what was the appraised value for the year before they sold. And this is an environment where commercial prices are weak, so it should have been pretty forgiving for the appraisers. The values were 40% above where they were appraised at. And so you can't look at this evidence without taking a better look at the data. And you should also be looking at the data that we're gathering as part of that. So I think those are 2 things that the Board of Review could be doing to make it better. Another thing is you need to look at how tax rates are changing as you estimate values. In the south suburbs, the residential assessments were up a lot this year, so that led to lower tax rates. In Park Forest, the tax rate fell from 46% to 24%. And yet, the Board of Review was taking appraisals that were still assuming the tax rate was 46%. So that was leading to artificially low values, even though we all knew the tax rate would be coming down because of where residential assessments had gone. So I think it's important to be using the better methodologies that are available to incorporate changes in tax rates on valuing commercial properties.
Okay. Okay. Next is what preventative measures will be taken for those at risk of losing their homes due to property tax increase. There's an asterisk. Foreclosure specialists are predicting a new wave of foreclosures because of the tax increases.
Well, first of all, levies have not gone up much. They go up 3 to 5%. There is an additional factor called recapture, which has to do with appeals at the Illinois Property Tax Appeals Board. When they make reductions, taxing bodies like school districts can increase their levy even more, put it on other taxpayers. You know, I think we should do something to address recapture as a driver of taxes. But really, remember, this is we didn't change homeowners' share of the burden much the last 2 years. The burden shifting was happening on appeal at Board of Review. So people should look at what more can the Board of Review do not to shift burdens so much. We think it's all about a difference in value, in how we're estimating the value of commercial, let's test it. Test our estimates versus their estimates. Let's go. Yeah. Let's see who's been more accurate, and then let's get our methodology. So the county has a property tax reform group that's going to look at this.
Does that exist anywhere else in the country? Do you know?
Yes. As a matter of course, most jurisdictions have something called a sales ratio study that does that exact test. Yeah. We think that can be done, and then we think a circuit breaker is something that the state should have for people who are being impacted most by shifts in burden or rising tax bills. And then there are some things that we also think can be done. The senior freeze is something that people have to apply for every year because they have to re-verify their income. It used to be that seniors had to reapply just to get their normal exemption to verify that they were still over 65. That was pretty insane. My mom said to me, son, now that you're assessor, I'd like you to take care of something because I'm not getting any younger. So we worked with our partners in the legislature to change that. But the senior freeze, you have to verify income for it. But we think it could be automatically renewed with data sharing with the Illinois Department of Revenue to verify people's incomes. So if they could say, hey, this person's income is still not over $65,000, you can automatically renew their senior freeze. That would help a lot of people who forget to apply for the senior freeze. Okay,
so 15 seconds on this one. From Paula in Cook County. Is there any momentum in Cook County behind increased, I'm going to say, frequency of tax bills, moving from twice a year to 6 or 12?
I know that I'm hearing a lot more from members of the General Assembly on this. I think a couple members do have bills that would make it a monthly, but I think this is something that needs to be worked out between the General Assembly and our wonderful treasurer, Maria Pappas, who I would never dare invade her territory.
Right, so, exactly. Okay, all right. I'm going to leave it there because, as Jackie mentioned, I'll admit I'm the one that's obsessed with time. But my takeaways are, yes, you're going to push for a circuit breaker. You think it's high value for us, and you're going to push to get it done. And second, the only thing to fear in the doom loop is fear itself.
That's right. And you know, Chicago has always reposition itself for where the economy is going. Like, that's been the story of the city from the get-go. You know, we last had a hog butcher like 70 years ago. You know, Chicago repositions itself all the time, and I'm confident that as a cultural powerhouse, a city at the center of the continent positions us really well for the new world of logistics and industrial. We're business services capital. We're in a good position to ride the new technology waves in data science, in data centers and life sciences, and we're affordable for homeowners. So that's pretty great. That's pretty good bones to work on. And then, if I could just say one more thing.
You can do it.
We do have a slide that I wanted to show you that we're very proud of. There's a study being done by
Is it the picture again?
Chris Berry at the University of Chicago. Okay, there we go. That's our birthday slide. So what these charts show is that, you know, a good assessor, it should be a flat line when you're estimating the value of homes from the lowest part of the price spectrum to the highest part. You shouldn't have a biased estimate of value. And in America, and before we came into office, it was very regressive. It was biased against people at the bottom 20% of the price spectrum. We were averaging sales in Hyde Park with sales in Washington Park,
right,
leading to over-assessment of Washington Park, under-assessment of Hyde Park.
But this, I mean, just to depict this for people, this is the gap between the lines is showing the inaccuracy in assessment, and the gap is biggest in a bad way for the people with the smallest.
Yes, paying more than double the effective rate of people at the top. So by using better data science, we've got wonderful data scientists in the crowd here. Raise your hand if you're a data scientist. There we go. We were able to flatten that curve and make it more equitable. And what did that mean? When we reassessed Chicago in 21, it meant the average neighborhood south of Garfield had lower residential taxes of about $400 a year.
Yeah.
And in some West Side neighborhoods like West Garfield Park, it went down $1,000 a year. And communities up north, they're like, I am okay if my assessments is fair as long as I don't feel like I'm being drawn into a dirty system and my neighbor is cheating the system somehow by hiring some guy. And that is how we've been able to make this work. And that's one of the things we're most proud of.
But that's, you know, I'm glad you ended there. I mean, that's why I think your background, back to where we started, in investing and looking for disparity, this is the benefit that the county has in having you in this role. And so I am thrilled that you're doing what you're doing. I appreciate it that you stepped into public service for our community that you and I both love so much. I am thrilled that you're doing great quantitative work, and we're ending here and not on the picture of me with that haircut. And I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, chapter 3 was going to be about what's next. It's too hard to tease that out of somebody as smart as you are, but I hope that you continue to do what you're doing in helping our region. So,
all right. Well, thanks, Jason. Thanks, everybody. Glad you're here today.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Assessor Kaegi. Chapter 3, we hope you'll hear about back here at City Club. Thank you, Jason Tyler from Northern Trust. Appreciate the conversation. Thank you both for your incredible hairdos back in the 70s. And we, as the assessor pointed out, negativity is contagious, but you know, Chicago is built on optimism and really has been rebuilt on optimism, and I feel like we're going through another rebuild on that optimism. So City Club certainly encourages you all to continue this conversation with an eye towards solutions, some that we may have heard here today. And brilliant people in the room, keep the conversation up. We're around for another hour or so. And as I said, we also have a whole host of great programs coming up. Next week, we've got Mark Reed from Loyola, and then another session on crime, guns, and solutions on the 11th. Carrie Steele is on the 12th from MWRD. Then the following week, we've got Rosa Escareno, the superintendent of the Park District, Speaker Welch from the Illinois House of Representatives, and of course Dorval Carter from the CTA. Now all three of those are sold out. We do have space for certain level members, so make sure you're up your membership, and we'll make sure you get in the room for some of those programs. So much more to come. We also sent out a save the date. Mark your calendars today. November 14th is going to be our second annual. It's what we call Amplification, our City Club Gala, that dinner and program. It's always a great evening. So look forward to seeing you all back here. Thank you again. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here today, sharing all this insight. And we welcome you all back very soon to City Club of Chicago. Thank you.